Hi there, welcome to Alpine Bravo. My name's Brendan and this is my channel for all things Microsoft Flight Simulator. In this video tutorial, we'll be looking at how to set up and configure the FSR500 by FSReborn, an absolutely fantastic single engine turboprop that is exclusively available through the Microsoft Flight Simulator Marketplace. It's really well modelled, it's got fantastic systems depth to it and a lot of realism. And if you don't want to get caught out and have the best flying experience, you do want to make sure your controls are well calibrated and everything is set up with regards to the realism as you want it to be. And this tutorial will take you right through how to do that. So let's start off by considering how to calibrate your flight controls. One of the first things you're going to want to do is get your flight controllers set up. Now, I'm only going to give examples here because with the great range of different controllers out there, exactly what you need is going to depend on the particular controller. What is good for a yoke is not necessarily good for a joystick, and certainly not good for a gamepad controller. All of them require a bit of configuration. So what I'll show you here is alpha flight controls, and I'm taking that because the aircraft was flight tested against alpha flight controls and calibrated using them. So what we'll do is we've got the default, and if we click on sensitivity here, we can see the elevator axis is one of the most important ones, crucial in takeoff and landings and climbs and all the rest of it. And this is the default here. Now, what I'd recommend is that the sensitivity be set to -30 for both top and bottom. There is no particular need for a dead zone in the middle, and the reactivity, if you do find for you personally that the aircraft feels a little bit too sensitive, one of the things you can do is drop the reactivity. I personally use 90, but you can go lower, and this just dampens the inputs that are coming from the control device. And it's good if you have maybe a habit of over controlling a little bit, or you just prefer to be a bit firmer on the controls. Take the reactivity down and it should feel less twitchy. For the aileron axis, now the Honeycomb Alpha has a full 180-degree range of rotation, left and so through its entire range, so 90 degrees left and 90 degrees right. And the yoke in a real aircraft doesn't quite have the same range of motion, but if you're using something that does have that, I would recommend that you leave the sensitivity at 0, so a straight line. And again, there's no need for a dead zone particularly. And again, I would recommend reactivity could be set fairly high, maybe lower it down to 90, so it's not quite so responsive. And that's a fairly good set of curves for a typical mid-range flight controller like the Honeycomb Alpha or the Cytec Pro flight yoke. If you're using something different, like a joystick with a very short range of travel, or particularly on the elevator axis, then you're probably going to want the curves to be lower and the sensitivity reactivity to be lower as well. Otherwise, you might find it too responsive. And if you're using a gamepad controller, then there are some other considerations with that as well. If you are using a gamepad controller, you can go to assistance options here, and then under piloting, you will find assisted controller sensitivity. Here is an option, and that is designed to help pilots using gamepads. There's also the auto rudder option here as well, which will basically allow the aircraft to control the rudder for you. And if you are newer to flying and using a gamepad controller, it's a pretty good idea using the auto rudder, or indeed if you just have a joystick and no real method of controlling the rudder, because it's pretty difficult to do using a keyboard. You'll probably want to set this to on. If you do have a device for controlling the yaw axis through the rudder, either a twist grip or a set of rudder pedals, then you're going to want to calibrate those as well. And here I have a Velocity 1 rudder pedals by Turtle Beach, and you can see I've got the rudder axis set up there, and then there are axes for the two toe brakes. And if we go over to sensitivity again, we can see how I have got those configured. And that's the yaw axis itself. I'm pressing the rudder pedals there. And I've got a sensitivity of minus 35, no dead zones. And I set the reactivity to just 55%. Because I find in Microsoft Flight Simulator, all controllers and all aircraft respond too strongly to yaw axis inputs. It's something in Microsoft Flight Simulator itself that isn't right, and you just want to have to try and dial it all down so you don't end up sort of juddering from left to right on the runway after landing or during your takeoff roll. And reactivity, lowered reactivity, can really help that. The other two axes here are for the left and right brakes. The brakes are pretty sensitive on this set of rudder pedals, but I kind of manage that more by how I position my feet. I don't have my feet, I push my feet lower down on the pedals, so if I'm steering, I'm not likely to brake by accident. But to help prevent the likelihood of braking by accident, I've set an extremity dead zone on each pedal of -9. That's probably was aiming to get -10, but I ended up with 9. And that just means if I do make a slight input like that, I'm not really getting much braking effect, and it just eliminates the chance of applying the brakes when I don't want to. But the reactivity I've left at 100%. Yeah, and there's no need to put any sort of curve on your brakes. You just sort of want a 1-for-1 response. If you don't have a set of rudder pedals, then binding the brake to something like the joystick trigger, that'll just give you nice even braking over both brakes at the same time, and that can actually provide for smoother braking on your rollout after landing. The only downside is you don't get the option of differential braking, which you can use to help turn the aircraft or correct the aircraft heading in some situations. Now you need to think about how you're going to configure the throttle and the condition lever. So here we have the throttle quadrant down here, and this is the throttle here, and this is the condition lever here. And I'll just shift the view so you can see even more clearly. The throttle is an axis which has a full range from max power all the way down to the idle stop here. Then after the idle stop you have a beta range, which is a reduced power range used for ground operations, and reverse thrust, which is again only used on the ground. The other control here that we need to think about is the condition lever. And the condition lever is an axis with two positions, cut off and feather, and run, and you only ever have it either in fully aft or fully forward. So you can actually use buttons to configure that, and those are set mixture buttons in Microsoft Flight Simulator controls will control that, but you can also put it on an axis if you want. And certainly with the power lever, I'll link a little video that I made on ways to use or configure the power lever and use the power lever. So you'll see a link for that just now. But I'll also show you how to configure it, or probably the best way to configure it if you are just doing it in Microsoft Flight Simulator options. Worth saying that Annex B of the aircraft manual does also have examples of how to configure the throttle and the condition lever using spad.next. So here we are back in the control options page, and I've got a Bravo throttle quadrant that I'm using, and I have selected that from the top here, and the profile I'm using is called FSR500 test. And whenever you change a default profile in this, it will prompt you to save the new profile with a new name, and if you ever need to change any of that or make duplicates, just use the preset manager down here where you can create new, duplicate, rename, clear, or set to defaults, or delete the profile. Let's come back out of that. And you can see I've got two controls set up, and this is what's going to work best for if you just want to configure in Microsoft Flight Simulator and not use external driver. So focusing on the throttle first of all, we have throttle one axis 0 to 100, and I've got that on a Bravo, one of my Bravo axes, and we'll just hit apply and save and go back into the cockpit, and as you can see, that's me got full range of the throttle. And at the idle stop, that is right in the middle. That's at the right in the middle of the throttle range, which isn't so far off what it is in the real aircraft. You can see that the idle stop is about, yeah, it's about I would say about 40% up from the bottom of the range there. Now, one of the things with the FSR500, it's a very light aircraft with a powerful engine in it, and you're only using beta and reverse on the ground, whereas in the air you want some fairly fine, you want probably finer control over your throttle axis in the air, so it makes some sense to adjust this axis to give you more of the range for the normal forward range of power, and then less available for beta and reverse because that's got less usage. So how do you do that? Well, we go back to control options. So we've got it all set up, throttle one axis 0 to 100, and it's reversed, it's ticked. So we're going to go to sensitivities. Now I'm just going to move the axis just to make sure, okay, that's the one I'm working on. And I'm going to show you a little trick here. So neutral, if we've got that 0 to 100 setting, allows us to change the point, the kind of the neutral point. So I'm actually going to put it up to 60. There we go. There's 60. And now that is where the idle point on the throttle will be. So everything in this part is the normal range, and everything in this part is the beta and reverse range. It means that the beta and reverse range is smaller, it's more sensitive, but it means that the normal range is larger and less sensitive to inputs. Now the other problem that you might have is that this point here, it's just software. It's not going to match any physical detente that's on something like the Bravo. Now if you've got a fancy throttle quadrant, it may well have physical detentes or an axis below a physical detente, but if you've just got one of the more normal ones or a normal axis, you're not. So to help you find that detente, what you can do is put in a small dead zone. You can see that's flat in there, and that means there'll be a point when you're kind of hunting around for the idle stop where, yeah, you should be able to find it, and it's a little bit of give. Okay, so let's see what that looks like in the cockpit. So here I've got the throttle set at maximum. I'm bringing it back, and I'm going to find the idle. There we go. And I'm moving the throttle a little bit, but because I've got that dead zone set, it's not moving. And that'll just help you click it in. There is an audible click that the throttle makes when it enters the idle detente as well. Now I'm pulling it back into beta. You can see it's a lot more responsive in the beta, and then as we pull it further back, then it will go into the reverse range. But I find personally that's manageable, but if you prefer less responsive, then don't set the neutral point so high, set a lower neutral point. But if you do that, then you're going to have less available. You're not going to have as smooth a forward throttle axis, and that might cause you some issues when you are coming in on approach and things like that. What about the condition lever now? Well, as I mentioned, that is on the mixture controls, so you can just use buttons to control it, to set it from cut off to run. If you want to do it on an axis though, I'll show you how to do that. So it's back into control options. And the control you want to use is mixture axis -100 to 100%. And you do not want it reversed, you want that unticked. And the sensitivity, it's just a straight line. There's no need, and in fact, what you want to make sure is that there are no dead zones set, either in the middle or at the extremity, as that will mess with its functioning. What does that look like in the cockpit? So here I have the axis pulled all the way down to the hardware stop, so it's in cutoff ever, and I'm pushing it forward, and that's it all the way. The axis is all the way up at the top at run. It's really straightforward, really easy to use. Now we should turn to consider what configurations we can set up on the EFB. You'll already have been through the welcome wizard, which will have set some things for you already, but you can change things at any time on the settings page here. And it's all fairly obvious. You have your units of measure. You can change the passenger vehicle. You can have it either on auto or select one from this list, and there is a modification available, free modification available, which will add different vehicle types there as well. Here you have action cameras, and the action cameras are like cutscenes that will just switch the camera to an outside view briefly while that action's going on. And if I put the aircraft exit on and go to ground ops and open the cabin door, you can see that you've got that, and then it will bring you back in automatically. Navigraph configuration, this is where if you are going to be using IFR flights and want to upload a SimBrief flight plan, this is where you put in your Navigraph user ID. That's not the same as your SimBrief 5-digit pilot number, but your actual user ID, you can get that from your Navigraph account. This option here will, if it's selected, then when you load in or when you load the flight plan, it will load it into the G1000NXi. That's on by default. But if, for example, you like to load your flight plan or do your flight plan via the world map, and you might want to do that so you stand a better chance of getting Microsoft Flight Simulator ATC to do the right thing, then you can select that off. Or indeed, if you prefer to manually program in your flight plans into the G1000. Navigraph charts, that is toggle that to it will bring up a QR code if you do that, which will allow you to register your Navigraph account if you have a subscription, and will allow you to access the charts in the aircraft. Aircraft wear and tear speed is fairly obvious. It goes up to a maximum of times 16, in which case failures will occur pretty rapidly. Adjust to suit. The aircraft stats, reset all. If you're having problems and you've got yourself in a tangle with failures and stuff like that, then just click the reset all and it brings everything back to its original. The other settings on the EFB that you want to think about are in the realism, and this is where you can control each and every group of systems, whether you want there to be failures or not in that system. A couple of things to note: if you want engine hot starts, you have to have the engine stress damage enabled in the main MSS failures settings. And also this ESP here, that isn't a failure, that is a autopilot feature, where if the aircraft is placed into an extreme attitude when you're hand flying the aircraft, that will nudge you back towards a lower angle of bank, or a lower pitch angle, or a higher pitch angle, depending on what you're doing. And if you keep on doing it, the ESP will eventually engage the autopilot in level mode. Persistence, everything in the FSR500 is persistent, including failures. So if you fail a system in one flight, quitting out and restarting won't solve the problem. You have to do the repairs in the maintenance page, but we'll cover that in a separate tutorial. The persistence as well here, if you want the aircraft to, when you land, to have the same fuel and payload as you had from the previous flight, you've got that there. And also this one, if you want to lock it so you can't change your fuel or payload in flight, deselect that. The tablet itself can be repositioned if you position the mouse here over the frame. And see, it's highlighted now. I can click with the left mouse button and hold, and I can rotate it around, or if I use the mouse wheel, of course typically it zooms in as well, but if I use the mouse wheel you can rotate it. If you want to, the brightness on the EFB is automatic, it will adjust automatically to the time of day, and if you want to pop it away you can click on that pocket down there and it just demounts it like that, and click to get it right back. Let's turn to configuring the multifunctional display and the PFD. These are persistent settings, so it's probably worth doing them me explaining them now, and then you can adjust them as you suit. But to do this we need to power up the aircraft, and we do that by turning on the battery, and we will turn on the avionics as well. And because we've got those on, we'll just go to the EFB, and we don't want to run the battery down. I've got realistic settings on, so I'm going to click here to connect a ground power unit. That'll just stop the battery running down while we look at the MFD and the PFD. So coming over to the MFD first, we have to press that button there to get the screen up. And there are two different ways of changing settings on the MFD. The main one, if I use the FMS knob here and the lower ring, as I turn it you'll see it's bringing up different page groups, and what we want is the aux page group here. And when you're in that, you use the upper wheel to move between different actual pages within that group. And what we want is the aux system setup 1. And in here, there are a whole load of different things that you can configure. The one thing that I like to change is how do we change things in here? Well, we right click the top of the FMS, that activates a cursor, and then you can use the lower to scroll through. And then here you can see we can change between Celsius and Fahrenheit, for example, how you want your temperature displayed. Once you select the one you want, press enter. And it's the same with all of these different configurations. Some of them of course are, as you can see, disabled at the moment, including all the airspace alerts. The MFD data field bars, data bar fields, you can configure these 4 numbers data bar information here to what you want. There's quite a range. So if we select one, we press we select it and then use the upper menu, and that will allow us to pick whatever we want. And we had it on distance to go. I mean, I'm not going to explain what all these different different things mean, you can figure that out, but DTG, distance to go. Once you're finished configuring on the screen, you want to right click the FMS knob again to get rid of the cursor. And once the cursor's gone, you can use the lower knob to move between the different page groups. Okay, so now we're at back at the navigation map. If we hit menu, we've got menu comes up here, and there are some really useful settings in here, so we'll hit enter. And if we, in the group, this allows you to set different configuration options for the different pages. So traffic, for example, this is going to allow us to configure exactly how we want traffic to be done. And again, just right click to come out of that. So we'll hit menu again, map settings, and what I really want to focus on now here though is the map. And you've got orientation. Well, you've got three options: north up, track up, or heading up. Choose as you desire. Put it on track up. And then there's an automatic switching on the scale, so if you zoom the map scale out above 1,000 nautical miles, it will switch to north up. You can configure that. Now with terrain display, it can be either absolute or topographical, I should say, or relative, or off altogether. We'll have a look at what those different ones look like. So we hit off, and I will zoom it in and out. It's just a straightforward, there's nothing going on here, it's just going to be a black background. Right, menu, so we'll go back, map settings. The one I prefer is to use, well, we'll show topographical, which looks a bit more familiar. And that is just your sort of green and blue, and with the relief, the high terrain shown in yellows and reds. But let's have a look at the final one, which is relative, and this is part of the terrain avoidance warning system. So we'll select that. And now if we zoom out, we're not actually getting, if we come out far enough, now you'll get relative terrain shown, and this is dynamic and it will change. So any terrain, it's a little bit different because I'm on the ground and it knows I'm on the ground. But yes, red is terrain where if you fly into that you will impact. Yellow is, I think, within 1,000 feet. I think red is within 500 feet and yellow is within 1,000 feet. Anyway, I can't exactly remember those range scalings, but there's clear, there's light black, which means there's no risk. Red is the highest risk, then yellow, then or amber, and then green. And it's a really useful feature, and it's certainly one that I always use in preference to the others. So what other map settings have we got which are quite useful? Well, the two down here are the track vector and the alt select arc, and I always like to have both of them on. And the track vector is going to be like a small cyan line which will extend from the nose of the aircraft, and as you turn the aircraft it will bend, and it helps you gauge the rate of turn, which is very handy if you are flying an instrument procedure like a DME arc. The track, the select alt arc is like a small cyan arc that projects out in front of the aircraft, and then when you set a target altitude using the GMA 710 autopilot controller, either using the alt select knob there or one of the alt select knobs on the panel bezels. I'll just sort of stick something in. You see I put in 3200 now. It won't show anything now because I'm on the ground, but what will happen is that in front of your aircraft a small arc will appear, and that arc will indicate where at your current rate of climb or descent you will reach that target altitude. Again, it is a very useful feature, particularly if you're flying instrument approaches that require you to cross certain waypoints at certain altitudes. We'll just right click to get rid of that. On the PFD, there aren't so many configurations that you need to think about. If we bring up on the menu, you can set the brightness as you desire. You can either have it automatic or manual. Most of these settings here aren't persistent, although the one that is if we go to map, and the inset map, which I quite like having the inset map. However, when you first start the FSR500 and the PFD is in reversionary mode, what's reversionary mode, I hear you ask? Well, let me show you. We'll just turn off the avionics. And now if we look back down at the PFD, we can see it's changed. There's this bar has appeared here down the side. That's all your critical engine information system. It's like a backup mode. In case your MFD fails for any reason, you've still got your critical engine information, and you've still got navigation information from the inset map here as well, which can also be displayed in the center of the horizontal situation indicator here. I'm not such a fan of that. I prefer the inset map. But one downside of the inset map is that it can obscure messages from the crew alerting system here. So sometimes if you are in reversionary mode, you have to either switch it into the HSI or turn it off altogether until you've finished doing what you're doing. But really there aren't too many other settings here other than I'll just highlight one under PFD options, which is your altitude units, and here is where you can select whether your Kollsman, your barometer is set in inches of mercury or hectopascals. You can switch between, and also you can change the altitude scale to read in meters if you so wish. Handy if you're flying in China or Russia. I think they use meters as well. That just about covers it for getting everything set up and configured in the aircraft. I do hope you found that useful. If you're already keen to get going, then do check out this video here on engine starts, which will help you get the aircraft going without blowing it up. The next video will focus on the pre-flight and the planning considerations for planning your flight in the FSR500. It is very much an IFR capable aircraft, although it's great fun for flying hand flying in VFR as well. But we'll go through some of those pre-flight considerations. If you found it useful, do hit like and subscribe. Do leave a comment if you've got any questions, and see you in the next video.